Welcome to Nifnex TV Perth. My name is Zeeshan Pasha and I'm your host. I've got lovely Alicia and I've got Rajab here to discuss a case study. Now these case studies are something that you send in to us and we address through the panel of experts. One of the case studies come in by a person in Perth. They're talking about how do we sort of charge a client or a customer and what to actually charge them. How much my time actually worth. So let's look at it from a different perspective and look at the digital side of it, the whole product and service component perspective, and also the marketing. Is undervaluing what you do just because it's going to sit well with the market? Is that a good idea? So can we start with Alicia? And Alicia, could you introduce yourself, and then we get straight into the case study.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you, Zeeshan. I'm Alicia Menkveld. I am from Radical Consulting, and I've been an entrepreneur and in the marketing arena for the last 16 years. I help businesses with marketing and branding strategies, and together with my husband's business, we also help businesses to implement online technologies to automate repetitive tasks in their business.
Fantastic. Roger.
Thank you for having me, Zeeshan. Always a pleasure to come on board this show. Basically, my name is Rajab Karume, you know that. I'm from Hay Hay Digital. So basically what we do at Hay is we work with business owners and decision makers to make sense of the digital age. There has been a shift in terms of business models in the last, say, 5 or 10 years, but it's much more so now being evident with a ubiquitous mobile phone and your laptops and your iPads. So basically what we do at Hay is we have a conversation and engagement with the decision makers and business owners in bringing the digital space to the center table rather than have it as a peripheral. So typically you would have your finance department having the high table position, and then you'd have a digital application or implementation seen as just a peripheral side effect of marketing. What we do is we bring this into the center to have an equal voice because of the mind shift and dynamics in the marketplace that requires that. So that's our differentiating point. We don't look at it as a peripheral, we look at it as a concrete and significant factor in any business.
Thank you for that. Now, just sticking with you there. Now, you know how you mentioned that the business models are changing,
yes,
and going digital as well. So, from that perspective, charging a particular client has also changed because obviously you are presenting at a particular expo, seminar, whatever, workshop, for example. Now you can do that online. The costs of running something online as opposed to in person is different. So could we sort of get you to address that side of things, and how much do you charge a client? How do you determine your price, your time?
This is a very tricky question, Zeeshan. As you would understand, every business would have its own different dynamics. And I'll look at it from a perspective of, say, 3 general positions. One says the fundamentals. So what are the fundamentals that you have in regards to, let's say we're talking about services here. So you have a service. So what are the fundamentals you're looking at? Are you looking at the intrinsic value that you're going to be delivering to the market? Or are you looking at the costs that you're going to be incurring so that you can pass them on to the market? So if you look at it from a fundamental perspective, then you're looking at it equally to how you measure pricing for a product. Secondly, you could look at it from a market perspective, as a broad terminology. From a market perspective rather, you'd be looking at it from what your competitors are doing. You'd be pointing out to competitiveness and what value again you bring. So there'll be a bit of an element of the fundamentals into the marketing. And lastly, we see it as a not fundamental but opportunistic.
What opportunities you've got out there?
Exactly right. Who else is doing this, and what are they charging more, and then we should charge equally more, or we should charge less to undercut them because maybe you're a new entrant and you're looking at it from an opportunistic perspective where you want to gain market share. So once you gain market share, and then you move up the ladder to say in the fundamental, and you become a unique seller, for example. So those 3 levels or those 3 broadsheet perspectives is how I would discuss this with an individual business.
Now, that's a good point you mentioned about going pricing yourself under and then gain the market share and come back up. But what role, how does that sort of impact from a marketing perspective, Alicia?
Like Rajab said, I mean, I think pricing is different for every company, and it's also different in terms of industries and markets and pretty much everything.
Yeah.
And I think it's part science and part art in a way.
Part numbers.
And part numbers, and I think it always boils down to, you know, obviously test and measure like everything else in marketing.
Yeah.
What I just want to say is that I found that a lot of small businesses and startups especially sometimes underprice themselves in comparison to competitors, and I believe that this can really hurt your brand in the long run.
Yeah.
The reason why I'm saying this is because if you underprice yourself, and then people will actually put you in a certain band of products. And if you wanted to create a premium brand, but you're not charging a premium price for it, then obviously it's hurting the brand. And once you started with underpricing, then it's actually really difficult, and it takes a clear strategy to actually move you from out of that just back into the market where you want it to be.
Yeah.
Also, I think consumers are really savvy these days, and they've been burned a lot because there's so many marketing techniques and foofies out there. So on that side of it, I think consumers are far more savvy than we sometimes give them credit for. And also, if you underprice yourself and you go out and you say, but my product does A, B, C, D, E, then consumers will sort of ask themselves the price. They will ask themselves the question, which is...
You knew what you meant.
Yeah, which is like, pretty much like, how can it possibly be that this product can do all of the above, but it's so cheap?
Yes.
At the end of the day, it's about delivering what you promised as well.
Correct.
So in the return of investment.
Yeah.
So you could charge whatever as long as it's a value that the other person sees and what they're paying.
I definitely agree that it's about the value. And I think that when you sell, you need to know what value do you sell, and it's not always about the price.
Yeah, perfect. From a digital perspective.
From a digital perspective, this is what I was mentioning earlier about moving digital from the peripheral to having a chair in the high table, if I could call it that. This happens especially with retailers. You see this quite often, where you have a stock standard brick and mortar shop, and then you have an online space, and then you decide that on the online space you're going to have massive discounts as opposed to the brick and mortar. So basically, the message you're sending out is saying that online, your costs are less. So then, therefore, you're able to pass in the cost savings to the consumers, whereas if you were to come to traditional brick and mortar, then the costs are relatively higher. However, that can send a bit of a mixed message. From our experience, we see that when you're looking at the digital space, it's only a vehicle, it's not a solution. So you're not going in there and saying, okay, I'll have a platform where I can mass market and pass on the savings. Then the question I would ask as a savvy consumer is, how come you didn't pass on savings early on? Because the savings shouldn't be significantly higher because you've already been in business, unless you're just starting up. So you tend to send a bit of a mixed message. So what we look at from our perspectives is the value. So if you have the same value, then the question would be, you should use the vehicle, digital, rather than use it as a solution to cut costs. So you should be able to deliver the same value online. So by having a price differentiation, it could, in our opinion, send a mixed message. So what we recommend is having a look at your objectives and understanding your client base better, because if you send two price points, you might tend to have two different client target markets.
I guess all of this sort of differs if it's a product as opposed to a service that you're
Exactly right,
well.
Yes.
So a product is fairly clear cut. you're pretty much ordering, so you got your product in, what sort of markup you've got to put, what are your other costs, marketing and etc. Put that on top and you go, okay, this is the product I can sell at, and I still make some sort of decent return.
That's right.
Do I need to sort of reduce it a bit more to then compete with the other market? If there's no margins, there's no margins. Whereas with services, it gets really, really tricky. Now, you want to run a seminar, you want 50 people in there, what are the costs of running that seminar?
Absolutely.
And how much does it cost per person to sit down in front of you?
Yes.
As opposed to doing it online.
And I would say with the shift again, it's moved from a seller's market to more of a buyer's market, as Alicia alluded to earlier. The consumers are very much more savvy. You can go online and find out, basically a cost of setting up a typical business and be able to work out how much margin they're making. So in a service arena where you're having a seminar, for example, and then you say, okay, well, I'm going to cost is cheaper because I've looked at the cost of per seat, for example, and then created a margin. I see that as more of a yesteryear type of mindset. So it hasn't shifted. You need to shift in that thinking because it's not about economies of scale anymore. Previously, you had a high emphasis on driving economy of scale, so lowest cost factor so that you can have more of a margin. But in this age, it should be more of an economy of scope. So should you fill a room with 1,000 people and deliver the same value, or should you fill a room with 20 people and provide them same value? So if I was to attend and there's 20 people and I get that value, would I pay more? That's a question you should ask, rather than having the economy of scale mentality. So that's why we say there's been a bit of a shift. So whenever we look at businesses, we have such discussions. So forget about how business worked in the yesteryears. Let's look at how we should be able to do it in this. That's correct, yes.
I just wanted to add to that from my, from a marketing perspective really, but it's also just from a general business perspective. I find that a lot of small business owners don't know the costs of their business. So, I mean, why do you start a business? You start a business because you want to make money. But it's actually shocking how many businesses don't really make money. And the reason is that when you start delving down from my marketing perspective and I look at whether it's services or products, and I'm saying which services do you have, to which part of the market are you pitching it, and there you can have a look at, in terms of markets, are you targeting the budget conscious? Are you targeting the people valuing convenience? Or are you targeting people valuing status? Okay, so that's sort of where you start. But from there, it's like most people don't really know what the real cost is. And obviously, if you don't know the cost, then how will you know what profit you can possibly make from this? And I think people also overlook, and you mentioned, touched on it before, Zeeshan, is that people overlook the overhead costs that also go into it. Telephones, renting of office space if you have a brick and mortar shop, employees, all of those are huge costs that actually need to be broken down, and it all need to be factored in when you want to see if you're making a profit or not. And also it helps you determine what you should charge, obviously. That's.
Well, on a different note, if you had to put product and services aside, you're going to catch up with someone for a coffee. What's the time? What's the cost of having that coffee? Is it still $4.50 times 2, or is it actually the whole time that you spend and the travel and everything else? Because I mean, people don't sort of value their own time most of the time. And also their expertise. Again, going back to the events point of view, yes, everyone's charging $97 for that seminar, but I've got 20 years experience in marketing, for example, and that's the reason why people are going to be sitting in front of you. Is it $97 that you have to charge, or really $2.99 that you got to charge because your time is actually valuable and you're passing on that expertise?
I would depart from conventional argument on that in regards to timing and valuing your time. So, for example, for coffee, the way we look at it is. Typically you look at your cost, say for example the coffee, 2 coffees an hour, how much do you value yourself for an hour? I think that's still in terms of the yesteryear mindsets. I think it's more about what value would you gain from that hour. So if you were to transfer it and say, okay, I'm meeting Zeeshan for an hour, and how much value would I get out of it? Remember, money is very subjective. So instead of saying my costs are X, Y, Z, then I will add a margin. That's where you create a lot of friction points. That's how most businesses are still working the SAE mindset in terms of business model, and then trying to plug into the digital age where a consumer is quite savvy and looking at you and saying, I'm not going to pay that, or that is ridiculous. Yep. So they can find a better coffee, a cheaper rate in a better location. So if you ask them for coffee, so if I'd asked you for coffee, you'd have a preference. So rather than me dictating where we should have coffee at what time, and so that I can put in my cost, I should be able to ask you, where would you prefer to have coffee? What's the best time? So what I'm doing there is I'm working with you as if, for this example, as my consumer. You're reducing the friction points. Me coming in and saying, let's have coffee at a certain location at a certain time, and then it's $4.50, so I've already factored it in. I've created friction points already. It might not be convenient for you, you might not like that coffee. So to you, you see this as just a coffee, and then I'll walk out and say, okay, this cost me, say, $25 plus my hourly rate, so that was $50, whether down the drain or potential. But if you were to swap it to, say, Zeeshan, where do you prefer to have your coffee? So the fact is about you. And this is the digital space.
You would do that with A-list clients, for example, not with everyone, as you, because I take your point.
Yes.
And it's, I think I love the conversation we're having with two different opinions, or three different opinions to an extent.
It's always good. It's always good to have.
Also, yes, are you making yourself indispensable to an extent? You're like, okay, for me personally, okay, I'm at a particular coffee shop and I'm going to have a coffee with a client.
Yes.
And they have another appointment coming up, or someone's requested an appointment 2 weeks ago. I'm going to be here. You might as well come here. We'll have a coffee here.
Yes.
Rather than where can I come? So then it sort of messes with your diary as well.
Can I just jump in here?
Yes, please.
I sort of want to say, I'm coming from clearly a completely different perspective to the two of you, okay? Initially, when I just started the business, relationships are really important to me, but there's different ways for me to build relationships. And so initially, I went out for coffees all over the place, all of the time, okay? A, because I started out, I wanted to get known, but B, also because I didn't really have this much to do in my office because I was still looking for work.
Yes.
But I found that as I got busier, I started thinking a little bit more about exactly that. How do I value my time? If I charge myself out at $200 an hour, okay, the meeting is always at least an hour. Plus I factor in my travel time, which could be very easily for me from where I live, half an hour in, half an hour out at a minimum. That's 2 hours. So we're already standing on $400, okay? Then there's obviously the coffees, which is a minimal amount compared to the $400 that we're already talking about. So the question that I started asking is, how necessary is this meeting to have? Okay, and what's the outcome of this meeting? Are we having a coffee because I just like you and I just want to have a coffee with you? Am I having this coffee because I want to find out more about your business, see how we can collaborate, possibly do something together? Now, I know relationships are important, and I'm not saying you shouldn't have coffees. What I'm trying to say is you need to decide where you are at in your business, and you need to decide what's your strategy for having these coffees. Are you doing it to get known in the market, to build your brand? Are you doing it to find JV partners? Are you doing it just because you have, I don't know, time to fill?
Yes.
And it all depends on your reason, and then you can justify the cost of really having this coffee. So like I say,
this is fabulous. I love this conversation.
No, so I have to say I guess I'm more calculated in having coffees these days than ever before.
and that ties in with my argument in the sense that instead of going to the coffee and saying, the coffee is $4, so 2 coffees $8, my $200 an hour, so that's $208.
Yeah.
That's what my argument is.
Exactly.
You go into that meeting looking at the objectives, looking at what value is in that meeting, what's the value for the person you're meeting. It's not only about you. So that's why the mindset has to change, where it's more about you, because you have to remember, the more you think about you, the less your clients think about you.
Yes.
In the sense that it's more about the clients.
Yeah.
And the businesses that are going to survive in this disruption are the businesses that will be looking at more what the client wants and how they can service the clients better, rather than about them. The days of me, the business person, and my costs are important to you are relatively tricky now. You have to be you have to be cognizant of the fact.
How about we catch a coffee, get a coffee out for
we can do it.
I'm not really sure you can afford me, Zeeshan, for another hour.
Just $200. Thank you again. I think we brought up the conversation up. Pretty good. It's actually very good perspectives.
Yes.
From value and the marketing side of it as well.
Yeah.
So let's catch up again next month.
Yes.
And,
For
let's
coffee.
do more case studies.
Yes. I look
Thank
forward
you.
to that. Yes.
Take care.
All right.
Thank you very
Thanks
much.
for having me.
Thank you.